Charles, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Good. So let's just jump right on into it. Can you give us a little bit about your background and also give us a little bit of insight on the Counter Narrative Project?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, so I'm from the South. And growing up in the South, from early on, was very inspired by the legacy and tradition of the civil rights movement and social justice organizing. And those are forces that I think have always been a part of my life, a part of my story. My parents were also very inspired in many ways by the civil rights movement. So I feel like when you grow up in Atlanta, you are very aware of the shoulders you stand upon. And I uh, so as I was growing up, I knew I wanted to, in some way, be engaged in public service. I knew I wanted to be engaged in social justice work, and to that degree, I found my professional path in the nonprofit realm. Also, a bit more about me. I've always been very passionate about stories and being a storyteller. And I was looking for a way to combine my interest in storytelling with my interest in social justice. And that's pretty much where the idea for the Counter Narrative Project, or CNP, came about. I also believed, well, I had an instinct before I had the actual words that narrative change was really important to social change. That in order to change policies, we had to change the narratives. And I just, at the time, didn't see a platform for myself to be able to do that. And that was also part of what inspired CNP. And so I always say that not only am I a narrative strategist, but CNP is a narrative shift organization. And we do that in three ways. We shift narratives by creating original content. We shift narratives by training advocates and organizers and community members to tell their own stories. And we also shift narratives by training the media on telling more responsible stories about Black LGBTQIA plus individuals.
And with your focus being, black, gay, bisexual, and queer men, kind of talk a little bit to the experiences of, black queer men in America that really influences the work that you all do.
Yeah, well, first let me say that my work and CMP's work is in many ways a love letter to Black, gay, bisexual, and queer men like Essex Hemphill, the poet, like Bayard Rustin, who we just celebrated commemorating his leadership of the March on Washington, to James Baldwin. And so there are so many Black gay men, Black queer men, Black bisexual men that made my work possible, that without even knowing it, played an important role in saving my life through the words that they left behind, through their legacy that I would eventually myself find, sometimes in times of despair, sometimes in times of joy. I would find their words and take inspiration. And so CNP in many ways is a love letter to those individuals. And I see it as being a continuation of the work that they started. I see CNP as being in the tradition, in many ways, started by the Harlem Renaissance and continuing on through the Black Arts movement and continuing on through the 1980s and 90s. And so our work is very much in conversation with that history. And so to think about, the state of Black, gay, bi, and queer men today, I think is also to have a historical perspective and just recognizing that both the joys and beauty of being a Black gay man today is not, sometimes in some ways, not that different than those that came before us also experienced, as well as some of the struggles.
And when it comes to like the work that you all do, what are some of the projects and initiatives that you all have in place that help, kind of push that mission forward?
Absolutely. Like I shared, that CNP is unique in that it is a narrative shift organization. And so we do that in part through training the media and storytellers on how to more responsibly tell the stories of Black queer people. And so we have what we call our media roundtable, where we recruit media organizations, media leaders, freelance journalists, content creators to really work strategically to give them the tools and resources to better tell the stories of Black LGBTQ people, both in terms of everything from combating HIV stigma to grappling with anti-LGBTQIA plus violence, to even talking about just some of the history and culture of our people. And so that's one of our anchor programs, the Media Roundtable. We have a number of partners that are a part of that. from Capital B Atlanta to Atlanta Voice. So we have definitely some Black media organizations, as well as content creators and freelance writers, and that's some work we're very proud of. We also, I talked about some another part of our work is the original content that we create. And so we have a digital publication called The Reckoning, and The Reckoning seeks to tell the stories of Black LGBTQIA plus folks. We've covered many different topics and many different areas of interest, from the legacy of historical figures like Norris Herndon, who was the first Black gay millionaire in the country, to the challenges and struggles of being in a relationship as a Black gay man, to politics, to businesses that we've had the opportunity to highlight. And so we don't take the work lightly to have the opportunity to tell stories about our community. We found that we are the authors of all, we need to be the authors of all narratives. And so that's really what inspires our original content. And finally, we have what we call our Narrative Leadership Institute. And that's where we train community members, advocates, organizers, aspiring content creators on how to more effectively tell their stories. And we not only sort of train you on the traditional elevator pitch, which sometimes is how advocates sometimes use storytelling, but we're actually really interested in training you on storytelling strategies. And so this past year, we've done trainings on everything from how to produce a documentary film, which was a training that we're very proud of, to how to become a podcaster. Again, another training that we're very proud of. So we want to not only give you the tools to tell your own story, we want to give you strategies, ways that you can tell your stories, and hopefully also advance, some economic justice. So we want you to be able to hopefully also get some resources for being able to tell your story as well.
And I have to ask too, here we are in a time where we are seeing so many anti-LGBTQ plus laws, so many anti-Black laws and movements that are happening in our country, especially in states like Georgia. Do you feel like the work that this organization does has become even more important and more pressing than ever?
Yeah, it's a terrible burden that we carry, that every day we face and confront anti-Black and anti-LGBTQIA plus violence against our communities. We, especially in the South, are no stranger to the persistence of white supremacy in our lives. And but it also is part of when mission meets moment. We don't take this work lightly. We recognize that to do this work in our current moment means being resilient. It means being courageous. It also means being innovative. And that's why we think it's important to not only respond to the oppression and structural violence that our community faces, not only through policy advocacy and grassroots organizing, but through narrative shift. Our belief as an organization is that bad narratives create bad policies. So in order to address the bad policies, you have to address the bad narratives. And we've seen many historical examples that before a single piece of legislation is introduced, before a single policy is passed, a lot of times there's a narrative that precedes it, a narrative that precedes horrible policies, a narrative that often precedes racial violence, a narrative being a culmination of stories that become a coherent narrative that has these very terrible consequences. So we think that it's important for every organization, for every activist, that not only do you have to have a policy strategy, you have to have a narrative strategy, because you have to intervene at the level of narrative. A kind of narrative violence that happens is the erasure of Black LGBTQIA plus folks, particularly from historical narratives. I think one of the more powerful moments that we witnessed in what I think is sometimes referred to as a racial reckoning. We can kind of quibble over how we'll refer to the historical period over the last few years, but the taking down of these monuments, the racist and the monuments that were reminders of the Confederacy, like taking these monuments down and pulling them down and changing the names of buildings. I think that there is an understanding, even with that, a visceral understanding that that there is a reckoning with history that is very much rooted to narrative shift. And so I just think that work needs to continue, just the honoring of our legacy, the honoring of our ancestors and the people that made our way possible.